Welcome everyone, and I hope we're going to have a good discussion tonight. I'm really grateful to Peter Rubery for giving up his time. Peter's Executive Principal and CEO of the Fallibroome Trust in Macclesfield in Cheshire. His academy is a designated national teaching school. It's judged by Ofsted as being outstanding. Peter's had an interesting background. He was an advisory teacher for TVI, seconded as Unilever Fellow to the London Leadership Centre at the University of London. He's got lots of links with schools in Australia, Europe and South Africa. And what I've asked him to do really is to just, in a sense, talk about his key priorities now. He's just recently taken over a group of schools, and I'm sure he'll tell us about that in detail. But he's got a few slides that he's going to talk us through. Okay, Peter, thanks very much.
Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, colleagues. Yeah, just to fill in that background detail, we're a newly established trust. We've been operating for 2 years, and we've evolved from a standalone academy to a multi-academy trust with 2 sponsored schools. One primary school, which is in our family of schools in Macclesfield, and one secondary school, which is just over the border in Cheshire West. That's the Wintford Academy, and both were designated RI schools, and we were brokered by the DFE to take them on. The other 2 founder members were one of our primary schools within our family of schools in Macclesfield, and then just this year, from September, we've taken in 2 more primary schools, and we're in negotiation with 2 secondary schools in Cheshire to join the trust, and that's likely to happen by the end of the year. So by the end of the year, we'll be an 8-school trust with 4 secondary and 4 primaries. What I had planned for this evening really was just to walk through that transition from principal of a standalone academy to executive principal of a multi-academy trust, and some of the challenges that I faced and some of the management theories that have helped me make that transition and get everybody on board really in very diverse circumstances and different stages of development and so on. Is that okay with you, Jeff?
Yeah, that sounds great, Peter. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, what I've started with in respect of... I'm just trying to move my slide. There it is. No, sorry, bit of a lag there. What I start with in conversations with leadership teams and with governors is the why question. And if you haven't seen this before, this is Simon Sinek, global leadership management guru. He's got a very succinct TED talk. Just put his name into the TED network, you'll get his talk up. But his belief is that most companies or organizations start with the what and then move on to how to deliver the what and don't even get to the why, and that's the wrong way round. You should start with the why question. Why are we doing this? What gets people out of bed in the morning? What's the motivation and so on? And then define how you're going to deliver in the process, and then that gives you the outcomes. And if we play this through the multi-academy trust agenda, then the why is to create opportunity, a world-class education for the 2,600 students in our community. The how is through high-quality teaching and learning and collaboration, and the what is a combination of the highest possible academic outcomes and the skills and qualities and aptitudes that students will need to thrive in a very uncertain future. He's only got 3 circles in his model. I've added a 4th circle. I think I might send this to him. Actually, I think this actually completes the circle. You can't do any of that without the who, and getting the right people in the right seats, is crucial to the delivery of that model. But I found that useful in just clarifying the vision and the values of the trust, and some of the why questions that I've been putting to senior leaders and staff and governors revolve around this idea that multi-academy trusts are a school improvement project, and they're driven by moral purpose, but also a commitment to continuous improvement. So, we've got 2 schools in our family of schools in our district that are not offering the best education to their students, and we've got a moral duty to support them because we've got the capacity to do that. So there's the moral purpose. But also my own school, that I've moved away from the principalship now, that's got to continue to improve as well. So the other model that I've used is the Sigmoid Curve, which colleagues may be familiar with. This is the idea that all organisations have a life cycle. The Roman Empire, Manchester United, whatever, and human life, you go through that cycle. And the idea is that you should change and refresh as you approach the top of that cycle, create some uncertainty, some disruption, and then start a fresh cycle of growth. If you leave it too late and you're on the downslope, then it becomes much harder and so on. So that applies to Fallibroome, certainly. We've adopted this model over the years as we've moved from a foundation school to an academy school to a teaching school to a multi-academy trust. So we've adopted that model every few years as a means to refresh. The three strands that I think all schools need to succeed, that they need to attend to, are the strands of culture, teaching and learning, and leadership and management. And the challenge that I face is developing a culture, a common culture, getting commitment to a common culture, getting a commitment to high quality teaching and learning that serves the culture that we've established, and then developing leaders and managers who can take those ideas around teaching and learning, work within the culture, and create outstanding outcomes. And I'm happy just to walk through this invitational theory very, very quickly. This would normally be a couple of hours training for new staff. We run all new staff in the trust through this model because this clarifies how we do things around here, and it gives you the opportunity to remind people when they don't follow the values of the organisation. I came across this when I studied for an MBA with John West-Burnham and Brent Davis back in the 90s. This was pre-MPQH, but to be honest, it was the best training for headship that I had. It was a regular MBA, but it was formed around international educational leadership, and we had exposure to international ideas. And this idea came from John Novak and his colleague Perky, who are educational psychologists from Greensboro University in the States. It's built on two foundations: perceptual tradition, which very simply means helps people understand that people see the world differently. People have blind spots and scotomas according to their belief systems and their experience and so on. And also that everybody has a concept of themselves. They can be very positive things, they can also be negative things, but children, adults have a self-concept theory. And I would spend some time just working through those theories and clarifying them. But the key factor in this model is the assumptions column. The assumption is that we all operate somewhere on a continuum, from trust, respect and optimism, down to suspicion, contempt and pessimism, and sometimes we operate inconsistently in between those two scales. And when I ask an audience of new teachers, do you recall anybody in your school experience that treated you with suspicion or contempt or pessimism, then everybody's got a tale of a teacher who operated like that, because some teachers believe that's the best way to maintain discipline and so on. They could also probably recall their favourite teacher, some of those instinctive natural teachers, who just create the conditions for learning by treating people with trust and respect and always being optimistic. Now, if you followed that through, and let's just take the circle with the 5 Ps, and you operated in your interactions with people with trust, respect and optimism, and the curriculum that you offer to children invited success rather than invited failure, and the language around the academy was invitational. For instance, does it say welcome to the Fallibroome Academy, or does it say pupils must not go through this door, which is disinviting? If you follow that through and you go to the right hand side of the diagram, then you get a beneficial presence and you get a culture and an ethos. Equally, if you operate at the bottom with suspicion, contempt and pessimism, and you follow that through the people and you treat people with suspicion and contempt, and you have a disinviting curriculum and language and so on, then you have a lethal presence. And the interesting thing I found about this model was that it really just gave me some reassurance that that's how I do things naturally and instinctively. And the point about the lethal presence is that if you treat people with suspicion and contempt and pessimism, then they'll find a way of getting you back. If it's teachers, colleagues, then they'll get you back through work to rule and not going the extra mile. If it's children, they'll get you back through poor behaviour and disobedience and not meeting deadlines and all those kind of things. So I found this very useful for clarifying what we mean by our values, and those are our values at Fallibroome: trust, respect, and optimism, and the trust.
So, Peter, can I just ask you before you move on? So, with new staff, like the start of this term, do you go through this in a sort of seminar way, or do you do it as a lecture, or how do you do it?
Yeah, we have a new staff conference a Friday night and a Saturday morning where we get people together and we spend time walking through these models and presenting we're a performing arts college and we present a teaching and learning model, which I'll come to, which is the Canadian Cooperative Group Work model, and the school improvement priorities. And those things are all valuable themselves, but the really valuable part is the social interaction, getting to know people, building the relationships, building the trust and the respect and that sense of optimism. I think if you don't do that, then you're making assumptions that people will pick up your culture, and that's risky.
And what you've also done there, isn't it, is to create a little group of new staff who will feel they can support each other, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And what I was going to move on to, Jeff, was that it also allows you to address the occasions where people don't meet the values of the organisation. If you look at this quadrant here, then you've got values and performance on the axis. There are circumstances where people share the values of the organisation but aren't yet performing. There are occasions where people are performing, producing outcomes and so on, but don't share the values of the organisation. And this is the challenge, really, that what do you do with people who produce good outcomes, particularly if they're in shortage subjects? Your head of maths, producing decent outcomes, but doesn't share the values of the organisation, is countercultural, works in that area of suspicion and contempt and pessimism rather than trust, respect and optimism. If you've got people whose values are strong and they match the values of the organisation and they're not performing, you can coach them. See the arrow? And we're trying to get people up to that top right-hand corner. People in the bottom left-hand corner who are neither performing and don't share the values, then those are the people you've got to move on. You can't work with them. The real challenge is the people in the bottom right box. What do you do with them? They're performing but don't share the values. And this model suggests that you should let them go. You shouldn't work with people who don't share the values of the organisation because they're poisonous, damaging. If they're not prepared to be coached, then you should let them go as well. But I can put on those occasions where it's necessary, I can put the invitational framework back on the table and say, look, don't you remember when we did this session, we operate up here at this level, you're operating down here, and that's why that parent is angry with you because you treated their child with suspicion and contempt and so on. So I found it useful, just to clarify the values of the organisation. Otherwise, you're just making assumptions and hoping.
Peter, I had one job at one time when I used to go and visit new heads about a month into their headship. And what always impressed me was when the new head had found different roles for people, which meant they were still succeeding well, although doing a totally different role. And I think that's a real sign of good headship, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and that's what I put in brackets in that box, let go or move sideways. I mean, doing this with dignity is always the best way, and finding a different role that suits their skill sets often leads to relief, doesn't it, all round. So that was my, touch on the first strand of culture and creating the culture in the organisation. The other unifying principle that we've used to draw everybody together is this belief in the value of a whole education. And if colleagues are not aware of the whole education organisation, then could I recommend it? It's a fledgling organisation. It's got a national profile, but it's still a fairly young organisation. And it's a collection of schools who believe in this common principle of education, the point of education, the purpose of education is to create the conditions for children to succeed with the highest possible education, academic outcomes, but also develop the skills, qualities, aptitudes that they'll need. And it creates conferences, and it creates interest groups, and it shares best practice, and it's a good place to be, really. And again, it's I found it useful to share this as a unifying principle. If you sign up to our mat, then you share the belief in the value of a whole education.
So people listening, Peter, if they wanted to know about that, they could just Google it.
Yeah, it'll pop up. They've got obviously got a web presence and an organisational structure. I would recommend it. It's a subscription model. You can join and access some of the training, and they do a very interesting peer review process, which is looking at a school through the lens of whole education rather through the Ofsted framework, and it gives you the opportunity to judge your commitment, to the skills, aptitudes, personal qualities side of the agenda.
Yeah.
So that was my touch on culture, Jeff. If I move on to teaching and learning, would that be okay?
Yeah.
We were then looking for a model that promoted, that secured, that created opportunities to develop that ethos, that culture of trust and respect and optimism. And we came across that in a conference in the United States that I went to a few years ago. It was the Learning Brain Expo, and it was a combination of neuroscientists talking about how the brain learns and what the rats are doing in the lab and so on, and strategists who were taking the science and turning it into classroom strategies. And we came across Spencer Kagan, and I'm sure colleagues are familiar with Spencer Kagan's cooperative group work model. I think we're the portal for Kagan in the UK. This was about 10 years ago when we had access. And we've promoted this model and had a lot of interest and trained a lot of staff around the country. And we've remodeled that conference, that American conference in Manchester. We call it the Learning Brain Europe, and we run that every 2 years. And we brought over scientists from the States and strategists, and that's been very successful. But the key point about this model is that if you look at this classroom, if you were the head walking past this classroom or observing it, you'd see children there looking engaged and trying to attach the teacher's attention. But actually, if you analyse this, what's the level of participation? The teacher can only respond to one of those hands up. If she responded, for instance, to the girl in the front right, what would the girl in next to her do? What would her reaction be? She'd probably go, "Oh, why her and not me?" So there's only one person participating at a time there. So what's the level of thinking that the teaching's offering? Has she given any teaching time? What's the level of cooperation? They're all actually in competition, aren't they, for the teacher's attention? What about the little boy in the middle back right who's just looking away? Can you see him? He's actually thinking, "Oh my God, don't ask me this question because I don't know the answer," and he's hiding, isn't he? So, asking those questions, what's the level of participation, what's the level of thinking, what's the level of collaboration, are good questions. And Spencer Kagan's got this model of cooperative group work, which is based on these 4 key principles, and it simply structures time and talk. So rather than a didactic approach, rather than a simple group work approach, which is actually less efficient because in a group somebody will hide and somebody will dominate. If you structure who's talking, who's listening, if you organise the groups between mixed ability children, then the higher ability child can coach the lower ability child. And we found this a remarkably powerful model, not only for helping teachers to understand how children learn, but also for developing relationships, for developing trust in classrooms. It really does change the culture of a classroom. And we've trained all our primary colleagues in our network, in our 7 feeder primary schools, so the children come through into the secondary school understanding the model, and then we train the secondary school teachers as well. If you're a new teacher at Fallibroome, you have a 6-week training session every 6 weeks in our training school program, and we run academy weekends as well, so you get an immersion. And we used to send people over to Florida for a 5-day immersion at the Kagan Academy at Disneyland, Florida. Money's a bit tight at the moment, so we've not done that for a couple of years. But you can see the investment we've made, and it really is the compatibility with the cultural model, the invitational framework, that we've found so powerful. And we've layered onto that an assessment for learning model, a behaviour for learning model, which just makes the the teaching and learning strands of the school so coherent.
So Peter, just to say, so if I went into one of your feeder schools where someone's been through this training and I observed the lesson, what sort of features would I see that were good?
What sort of teachers?
Features, sorry, would I see?
Yeah, well, you'd see teachers using this model.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've as I say, over the years, we've trained pretty much every teacher in the primary school, and we don't expect teachers to use this all the time. It's obviously a professional judgment, isn't it, when you work with students in groups and when you use other strategies and so on. But yeah, you'd see all the classrooms organised in tables of 4. You'd see teachers who organised the groupings according to high ability, low ability, middle ability, and so on. And you'd see very skillful teachers using the structures for mastery or for recall or for memory. There are 212 strategies. And what we expect, what we train our teachers in, is master 8 of the strategies, and you've got a resource there that you can draw on. And when we go in and observe lessons, we have a lesson observation template that looks for participation. What's the level of participation? What's the level of oracy? What's the level of interaction? And if it's not there, then we say to that teacher, look, these things are missing. These are the factors for effective learning. You need to get yourself onto a cooperative group work program. This is where it's available.
So it all becomes pupil-focused rather than teacher-focused, you say?
Well, the children love it, because it, as I say, it builds relationships and it gives everybody a role because it's very structured. Yeah, we found it a very powerful model.
Yeah, good.
Okay, the third strand is the leadership management, and again, I'll just pick up a couple of models that I found useful in developing leaders. My job's changed. Well, no, the principle remains the same, really, whether you're a principal of a standalone school or a multi-academy trust. But your key job as the leader is to set the vision, set the goals, create the culture, create opportunities for leadership, and then get out of the way and let them lead. That's difficult sometimes, and I'm going to touch on the issue of accountability and autonomy versus prescription across a multi-academy trust right at the end. It is a challenge, but you've got to fall back on that principle of trust and then manage by exception, deal with the people that are not performing. I found this model particularly valuable, that leadership is this metaphor is, leadership principles are based on 5 poles of a tent, and we try and develop these critical competencies in our middle leaders and senior leaders. And the point here is that leaders need a balance of those complementary skills, starting with character. The tent is held up by the central pole, and that's character, moral purpose. But focus on results, develop your own capacity, have the ability to lead change and have high quality independent interpersonal skills. Knit those together, complex network, and you've got leadership competencies. And if you apply that to a change management model, which is the Cotter model, if people have not come across John Cotter, again, I would recommend him. There's a book called My Iceberg is Melting, which is a very simple picture book story of change management, and it uses a metaphor of penguins on an iceberg. But essentially, it's an 8-step approach to change management, as you can see here. And again, we found this useful. 2 of our I schools, for instance, where are they on that scale? What's the sense of urgency? Have you built a strong enough team? Have you got the right vision? And then the second phase, are you getting communication for the buy-in? Are you empowering people? Are you creating those short-term wins? And then the implementing and sustaining change. And it gives you a route map, gives you a pathway that people can see where they are on the path. People can understand what they need to do to move on to the next stage. And alongside developing the competencies, we found that a powerful model. If you then reflect on why organisations fail and put that into a multi-academy trust context, or even a standalone academy, if you're too complacent, and that goes back to the Sigmoid Curve, doesn't it? That you're assuming that you can just carry on being outstanding without much change. If you haven't built that coalition across governors and across leadership teams, if you underestimated the power of the vision, you're not recognising short-term wins and so on, then that's why you fail. Equally with the consequences, the strategy is a teaching and learning strategy, isn't implemented well. The Kagan model is a powerful model, but you can't expect it to generate any sort of change if you just put teachers through one training session and then expect them to master it. We've invested time in the training program, support for people, training trainers so we can sustain the delivery of it when people move on. You've got to implement new strategies well, not just have a superficial approach. And then finally, these principles of leadership: always deliver, don't overpromise, follow through, be humble, don't flaunt your authority, makes you more approachable, opens the door to relationships. And then I'm sure if we've got an audience of head teachers, then they appreciate how lonely the job can be at times. So find somebody who can be your mentor, who can be your mirror and reflect back and give you that 360-degree feedback and process. Without that self-critical view and knowing yourself, and particularly knowing what your strengths are, then it's impossible to have the integrity that's required and necessary for leading a group of other head teachers. My leadership team now are 6 head teachers or principals, and they're leaders in their own right. And I've got to pull them together as a team, and they've got to respect my integrity and so on.
Can I just say, Peter, that in terms of some of these things that you're talking about, like the 360 degrees, that certainly best practice networks happy to help people find those tools, and look on our website for that sort of thing.
Yeah, certainly I'd recommend those. I've seen those in practice, Jeff, and they've got high value. So moving towards the end, Jeff, I think we've got about 10 minutes, haven't we? And I'd be happy to take questions. But again, just a reflection on fatal flaws, and this is how I hold my principals to account. They've got to model these qualities and show initiative and bring something to the table. It's not a question of Fallibroome being the mothership and dispensing bounty and improvements and so on. We're all in this together, and it's very much a peer support model, and we learn from each other working in different contexts, and we expect people to show initiative in that respect. These are the key challenges, just to close the presentation, Jeff, that I'm facing at the moment, and it's that continuum between autonomy and prescription. I know some trusts are very prescriptive. They go in with a curriculum model, with a staffing structure, with a budget plan, and they expect schools to pick that up and model it and deliver it. I don't do that. I believe autonomy is a key motivator, and as long as we've established the vision, as long as we've established the cultural expectations, then I give as much autonomy to my principals as I can. I just hold them to account to meeting the organisational goals. The other challenge that we're facing is the influence of the EBAC on accountability measures, and certainly our Progress 8 score has dropped over the last couple of years because we do not chase the EBAC. We don't force children to take EBAC subjects. We have a completely open option program, and I don't fundamentally believe that if you're a passionate performing artist and you want to take music and drama, then you should abandon one of those and take geography. I don't believe that's the right way to engage children, but we're now faced with a challenge of that being reflected in our Progress 8 score because we've got dozens of zeros, that in the EBAC bucket. So we're having that debate at the moment, and we're being challenged to stick to our principles of a whole education or respond to the impact of competition if other schools around us are doing that and producing a stronger Progress 8 score and so on. Funding school improvement strategies, we're all facing that challenge, aren't we? And that's largely tied into the growth of the MAT. We need those two other secondary schools to come into the MAT to provide the income to deliver the school improvement strategies that are at the moment being delivered by goodwill, colleagues agreeing to work together, at my instigation. Not really sustainable. We need people who can deliver that, monitor it, be held accountable to the programs and so on. And then finally, managing the growth of the MAT without damaging the mothership, which is Fallibroome. We were the instigator, we're largely the source of capacity for school improvement in the MAT. There's a risk that we take our eye off the ball and we fail to deliver the standards that we used to. So that's another key challenge. I conclude by recommending some reading. We've shared this amongst my head teachers, my leadership team, the principals. We read this over the summer and reflected on it. I would recommend it. It uses the All Blacks rugby team as a metaphor for leadership, and it's quite inspiring. So I'd recommend that to colleagues if you're looking for something to inspire you and refresh your leadership principles and so on. How's that, Jeff? Should we pause for questions?
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Peter. I think it's been really useful, and in fact, we've maintained our audience throughout. Nobody's dropped out, so well done. Can I just ask you a question? I'm just thinking, when you get up in the morning out of bed, what is it that gets you out of bed to do the job you do?
It's that passion for education, first of all. I just love learning myself, and I had a great experience at school. It wasn't particularly academic, but I had great teachers and I had great exposure to sport and the arts and all the community and social things that come with that, really. So I was always going to be a teacher, through sport, I guess I found I had leadership skills and had those opportunities. Played sport to a high level. Followed the passion for music, and so I just want to create the opportunities I had for as many children as I can, really.
Yeah, and I think from the video, which I hope people have watched, you're in a fantastic school, and the video is absolutely great, I'd encourage people to watch that. If not watched it, it really cheers you up actually to watch it and see those kids so involved. I think what's been really good about it is the way that it's been quite a comprehensive presentation, but it's based on real life because you are doing the job, and it's great that you've got those principles, Peter, that you've talked about. So well done.
Yeah,
Tim.
Fine, and that's come from, as I say, it's come from that love of learning. It's come from engaging in reading, developing leadership training through MBA and other opportunities and so on. And it's a fascinating business, leadership, isn't it? And
yeah. So thanks very much, Peter. And
yeah, I'll just say to colleagues, if you haven't seen the video, just have a look, really, because it does say more about my school than words or slides could possibly do. So we've had a lot of fantastic response to it.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay. All the best.
So, colleagues, just to say thank you very much for coming this evening, and you should see in front of you a couple of dates for our next head-led seminar, the 10th of November, 7 p.m. and the 1st of December, 7 p.m. So please do book those dates. Just before you go, if I could just ask you a question. We mentioned about the 360-degree leadership diagnostic we have, and we have a number of other tools, but just a little quick poll. If you'd like us to send any more information about our services and products, you just click yes, please, or not at this moment, just so we get to know what it is you would like or not like, and then we can just send that information out to you. So as I say, thank you very much, colleagues. Good evening, and we wish you all well. Thank you very much.